It was a late evening when David Carter was driving through a quiet stretch of road that led out of the city. The night air was calm, the streets almost empty, and the soft hum of his car's engine was the only sound that kept him company. David had spent most of his life serving his country, but tonight he was simply a man on his way home. He wore no uniform, no medals, and carried nothing that revealed who he really was. To anyone who saw him, he looked like an ordinary man enjoying a drive in a sleek black sedan. His face was calm, his hands steady on the steering wheel, his mind drifting to thoughts of his family waiting for him at home. In the distance, he noticed flashing red and blue lights. The siren wailed for a second, then went silent. David glanced at his mirror and saw a patrol car pulling up behind him. He slowed down, pulled over to the side, and gently stopped his car. He had done nothing wrong, so the sudden stop confused him, but he stayed calm. Years of discipline had taught him to control his reactions. He knew from experience that staying calm was often the best choice. The patrol car stopped, and out stepped a tall police officer. His walk was fast and heavy, his hand already resting near his holstered weapon. The look on his face carried suspicion, not politeness. He did not see David as a citizen to be greeted or a driver to be informed of a small mistake. He saw him as a threat. He called out loudly, his tone sharp and commanding, as if David had done something dangerous. "Step out of the car." "Now," the officer barked. David did not move immediately. He kept both hands on the steering wheel, the way every driver is advised to do. He rolled his window down and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" But his calm question only seemed to make the officer more suspicious. The officer's eyes narrowed. "Don't talk back. Get out of the car right now, or I'll make you," he snapped. His hand was now firmly gripping his weapon. David could feel the weight of the moment. He knew he had done nothing wrong. He was driving within the speed limit, wearing his seat belt, and the car was his own. But he also knew he was being judged not by his actions but by the color of his skin and the type of car he was driving. His luxury sedan seemed out of place to the officer, who already made his decision in his mind. Slowly, David unbuckled his seat belt and raised his hands where they were clearly visible. He spoke softly again, making sure not to sound angry or confrontational. "I am complying, officer. I am getting out of the vehicle." He opened the door carefully and stepped out. The officer immediately raised his gun, pointing it directly at David. A few cars passing by slowed down, drivers craning their necks to see what was happening. Some even pulled over to watch, phones in hand. "Get on your knees," the officer shouted. David sighed. This was not the first time in his life that someone underestimated him. But this was different. This was not just disrespect, it was humiliation. Still, he followed the command. He lowered himself slowly, kneeling on the cold pavement with his hands raised high. From across the street, a woman whispered to her husband, "Why is he treating that man like a criminal? He looks calm, he doesn't look dangerous." Another passerby had already started recording the scene on his phone. The flashing police lights made the moment even more dramatic, and soon a small group of people gathered to watch. The officer walked closer, gun still pointed, his voice full of authority but also of arrogance. "Whose car is this? Did you steal it? Tell me the truth right now." David kept his composure. "It is my car, officer. Registered in my name. You can check the documents inside the glove compartment." The officer scoffed. "Don't play games with me. You don't look like the kind of man who owns a car like this. I know your type." Those words stung, but David kept his face calm. He had endured harsher words in tougher places. The crowd murmured, sensing the unfairness of the situation. They could see David's posture. He was not resisting, not causing trouble, simply waiting. His calmness only highlighted the officer's aggression. The officer then pressed his radio button and called for backup. His tone was almost boastful, as if he had just caught someone dangerous. "I've got a suspect detained," he said. "Might be connected to something bigger. Send another unit." David closed his eyes briefly. He was tired not physically, but emotionally. He had spent years working with some of the highest offices in the nation, protecting people who would never know his name. Yet here he was, treated like nothing more than a criminal on the side of the road. The phone in his pocket buzzed. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached for it. The officer's voice rose sharply. "Don't you dare move your hands. Keep them where I can see them." David spoke firmly, for the first time showing a hint of authority. "Officer, I am taking out my phone. You are making a very big mistake. I suggest you allow me to make this call." The officer frowned, confused by the man's confidence, but still kept the gun pointed. "Fine. But one wrong move and you'll regret it," he muttered. David carefully pulled out his phone. The screen lit up, reflecting on his calm face. He began to scroll through his contacts with steady fingers. The officer and the crowd watched closely, not knowing what he was about to do. The night air grew tense. The sound of distant traffic faded, as if the world itself had paused to witness this moment. The onlookers sensed something unusual. This was not a simple roadside stop anymore. This man was not ordinary, and his next move was about to change everything. He found the number he was looking for, pressed it, and lifted the phone to his ear. His voice, low and controlled, carried authority. "This is David Carter. Connect me to the Pentagon Operations Center. Clearance code Alpha 7, the words were quiet, almost gentle, but their weight hit the air like thunder. The officer froze, the crowd gasped, and for the first time that night, the balance of power began to shift. The sound of David's calm voice still hung in the air when the officer's face twisted with disbelief. He had expected the man on his knees to beg, to panic, maybe even to argue. But instead, this man was speaking with confidence, giving codes, using words that seemed far too official for the situation. The officer's grip on the gun tightened, though a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. David kept his phone to his ear, ignoring the weapon aimed at him. The voice on the other end of the call answered almost instantly. "Colonel Carter? We read you loud and clear. Please confirm your status." The voice was formal, professional, and respectful. The crowd standing nearby exchanged looks. They didn't understand every word, but they could tell this wasn't an ordinary phone call. The tone, the words, this was something serious. David responded firmly, but in the same calm tone he had used all along. "Status secure. I've been detained by local law enforcement during a traffic stop. Location is State Route 41, mile marker 27. Verify clearance code Alpha 7, Echo 9. The officer's mouth went dry. He shifted on his feet, lowering his radio slightly. Still, he tried to cover his uncertainty with anger. "What kind of nonsense is this? Who do you think you are, calling some friend to play tricks?" But before David could even reply, the voice on the phone grew sharper. "Colonel, we are dispatching confirmation now. Stay on the line." David's calmness unsettled the officer even more. He had been so sure when he pulled over the sleek black car that he had found someone suspicious. To him, David had looked out of place, a black man in a luxury car driving through his quiet town at night. It didn't fit the picture in his mind, and so he had decided something was wrong. But now, his certainty was beginning to crack. More cars began slowing down to watch. A few more phones were raised, capturing every detail of the scene. The flashing police lights painted everything in red and blue, and the quiet road was no longer quiet. People were whispering, "Did you hear that? He called the Pentagon. The Pentagon. Who is this guy?" David, still kneeling with his hands up, turned his eyes toward the crowd. His expression was calm, almost reassuring, as if he wanted them to know he was not afraid. His posture was humble, but his presence was strong. The officer barked again, desperate to regain control. "Put that phone down right now, or you'll regret it." David didn't move. His voice, still steady, carried across the tense silence. "Officer, I warned you that you are making a serious mistake. You should put your weapon away before this goes further than you can handle." The words were not shouted, not angry, but they carried a weight that made even the crowd go silent. Something in his tone sounded like a man who was used to commanding respect, not asking for it. A few moments later, the voice on the phone returned. "Colonel Carter, confirmation has been made. Federal response teams are already moving to your location. Estimated arrival in minutes." The officer's eyes widened. He felt a rush of heat in his chest. This couldn't be real, could it? He tried to cover his rising fear with more shouting. "Don't play games with me. You're just trying to scare me. I know who you are, some con artist with a fancy car. You're nothing special." But the crowd wasn't convinced. They were starting to see the cracks in the officer's confidence. People were whispering louder now. "He said Colonel. Did you hear that? Colonel Carter. That sounds like the military." One man in the crowd pulled out his own phone and quickly searched online. His eyes widened. "Oh my goodness. He's real. This man is really a colonel. He works with defense operations." The murmurs spread, and soon more people were staring at the officer, their expressions turning from curiosity to disapproval. They weren't just watching anymore, they were judging. David lowered the phone slightly but kept the line open. He looked directly at the officer for the first time since kneeling. His eyes were steady, unwavering. "You looked at me and assumed the worst. You don't know who I am, what I've done, or what I stand for. But tonight, you've shown more about yourself than you realize." The officer's throat tightened. He wanted to bark back, but the words stuck. His radio crackled suddenly, and a voice from dispatch said, "Unit 7, be advised. Federal authorities are requesting confirmation of your current stop. Respond immediately." The officer froze. His own dispatch was now involved. The Pentagon call wasn't a bluff, it was real. The small group of bystanders gasped at the radio call. A woman in the crowd said softly, "This man wasn't lying, he really called the Pentagon. This officer is in big trouble now." The officer's hand trembled slightly on his weapon. He swallowed hard, trying to hide his nerves. "Dispatch, suspect is detained. Situation is under control," he stammered. But David's voice cut in, calm yet firm. "No, it is not under control. Not when a citizen is treated this way without reason. Not when respect is denied at gunpoint." The silence after his words was heavy. The crowd nodded, murmuring in agreement. David's phone buzzed again, and the voice from the Pentagon returned, this time louder through the speaker. "Colonel, multiple units en route. Estimated 3 minutes. Please remain calm. Officer, this is Federal Command. You are instructed to lower your weapon immediately. Stand down." The officer's face went pale. His hands shook, though he tried to keep his posture stiff. He was no longer in control, and everyone knew it. But instead of celebrating, David remained composed. He did not smirk, did not boast. He simply stayed in place, his calmness making the officer look even smaller in comparison. The bystanders lifted their phones higher, recording every moment. What had started as a humiliating scene was now turning into something powerful. People could feel they were witnessing a moment that would be talked about far beyond this small town. The officer finally lowered his gun, his hands trembling as he returned it to his holster. His voice, once filled with authority, was now weak. I was just following procedure, he mumbled, but even he knew it sounded hollow. David stood slowly, stretching his legs from the cold pavement. He kept his eyes on the officer, but his words were calm and controlled. Procedure is meant to protect people, not to humiliate them. You've forgotten that. The crowd broke into soft applause, not loud or mocking, but respectful applause for David's calm dignity in the face of humiliation. The officer looked around, his face burning red, as he realized everyone was against him now. The sound of sirens filled the distance. This time, they weren't local police. Black SUVs and military vehicles approached fast, their headlights cutting through the night. The crowd parted, whispering in awe as the scene shifted yet again. The real response had arrived. And as the first vehicle stopped, the crowd realized this was only the beginning of a story that would echo far beyond that quiet stretch of road. The distant sound of sirens grew louder, cutting through the night like a warning bell. Everyone standing on the roadside turned their heads, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. The officer who had pulled David over stiffened, his eyes darting nervously toward the approaching lights. He had expected a backup car from his own department, maybe another officer to help him control the situation. But these sirens sounded different, lower, stronger, heavier. David stayed calm, still holding the phone in his hand. His posture was steady, his expression almost unreadable. He didn't need to explain anything. The crowd around him could feel the shift in the air. Something important was happening, something bigger than this roadside stop. The people who had gathered leaned closer, whispering to one another, their phones raised to record every detail. A few seconds later, the first set of black SUVs appeared. They weren't like the local police cruisers. These were larger, darker, and they moved with purpose. Their headlights sliced through the darkness as they rolled in, stopping quickly in front of the flashing patrol car. Behind them came two more vehicles, their tinted windows hiding the people inside. The officer's mouth went dry. He muttered under his breath, almost as if trying to convince himself. This can't be for him. No way. This isn't real. But it was real. The SUVs stopped, their doors opening in perfect coordination. Men in dark suits stepped out, their movements sharp, disciplined, and purposeful. They didn't look around nervously or waste time asking questions. They walked straight toward David, their expression serious, their eyes scanning the scene with practiced precision. The crowd gasped. They had never seen anything like this in their small town. Some people even stepped back, overwhelmed by the sudden presence of federal authority. It felt like the quiet roadside had turned into the center of a national security event. The officer who had been shouting commands just moments earlier now looked frozen, his confidence crumbling. He took a small step back as one of the suited men approached. The man didn't speak to him. Instead, he stopped in front of David, standing tall, and gave a sharp salute. "Colonel Carter, sir," the man said firmly. "We were dispatched immediately upon confirmation. Are you safe?" The crowd erupted in whispers. "He really is a colonel, oh my goodness, this is real," someone said. The recording phones shook slightly as people tried to capture every second. David nodded calmly, his voice steady. "I am fine. No harm done. But this situation requires attention." The officer blinked in shock. A salute? Federal agents addressing this man with respect? He glanced around, desperate to make sense of it. His authority had vanished in an instant, replaced by confusion and embarrassment. One of the agents turned to the officer. His tone was sharp, carrying the weight of authority the local man could not match. "Officer, lower your weapon immediately. You will explain your actions later, but for now, you will stand down." The officer fumbled, quickly tucking his weapon back into its holster. His hands were shaking, his face pale. I was just doing my job. I didn't know who he was," he stammered. The agent's eyes narrowed. Your job is to serve and protect, not to humiliate and endanger without cause. The officer swallowed hard, unable to respond. The crowd's eyes were on him now, their earlier sympathy gone. What once looked like a show of authority now looked like a mistake played out in front of too many witnesses. David finally rose to his feet, his movements calm and deliberate. He didn't gloat or raise his voice. Instead, he looked directly at the officer who had pointed a gun at him minutes earlier. His expression wasn't angry, it was steady, almost disappointed. "You judged me before you even spoke a word to me," David said softly. "You assumed I was a threat because of how I look and what I drive. You never asked my name. You never checked my license. You only saw what you wanted to see." The officer's face turned red. His lips parted, but no words came. The silence around him felt heavier than the sound of all the sirens. David turned slightly, addressing not just the officer but the crowd as well. Respect should not depend on who someone is, or what title they hold, or what uniform they wear. Respect should be given because we are all human. The crowd nodded, some even clapping quietly. His words carried weight. They weren't loud or dramatic, but they were powerful because they came from calm truth. The federal agents moved closer, forming a protective circle around David without being asked. Their presence made it clear who held authority now. A second agent stepped forward and said, "Colonel, we have transportation ready if you wish to leave the area." David shook his head gently. "Not yet. The people need to see this through." He stepped closer to the officer, lowering his voice but making sure the crowd could still hear. "You see, officer, if you had simply spoken to me as a man, as a fellow citizen, this would not have happened. But you pointed a gun at someone who has spent his life protecting this nation. And you did it because of what? Because of what you assumed." The officer's eyes darted nervously. His knees felt weak, his badge suddenly heavier than it had ever been. He whispered, I didn't mean." David raised a hand gently, stopping him. "It's not about what you meant. It's about what you did. Your choices have consequences, just like mine do. That is the weight of responsibility." The words struck deep. The crowd shifted uneasily, their cameras still rolling, their faces reflecting both respect for David and disappointment toward the officer. At that moment, another set of headlights appeared, this time belonging to the local police backup finally arriving. Two squad cars pulled in, but they stopped suddenly when they saw the scene: federal SUVs, agents in suits, and the man they had been called to help detain now standing tall with authority. The local officers stepped out hesitantly. They looked confused, unsure whether to approach. The lead agent raised a hand, signaling them to stay back. "This matter is under federal oversight now," he said sharply. The local officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had never been dismissed like that before, especially not in their own jurisdiction. But the way the agents stood, the way David carried himself, it left no room for argument. David finally put his phone away, slipping it into his jacket pocket. He took a slow breath, looking out at the crowd. What happened here tonight should not happen to anyone. Not to me, not to you, not to your children. A person's dignity should not be questioned at gunpoint. Remember that. The applause that followed was louder now, more certain. People were nodding, some even wiping their eyes. What had started as fear and humiliation was turning into a moment of strength and clarity. The officer lowered his head, staring at the pavement. He knew his career would never be the same after this night. The weight of shame pressed harder than any punishment that could come later. David did not linger on him. Instead, he turned toward the agents, giving a small nod. "We can go now." The agents guided him toward one of the SUVs, the crowd parting respectfully as he walked. They weren't clapping anymore, but the silence carried a deep respect. People knew they had witnessed something that would be remembered: not just a man proving who he was, but a lesson about judgment, respect, and dignity. As David stepped into the SUV, the officer stood frozen in place, replaying every second in his mind. His arrogance had turned into humiliation, his authority into shame. And he knew the story was only beginning to spread. The vehicles pulled away, leaving behind flashing lights, murmurs, and an officer who realized too late that the world had watched him make the biggest mistake of his career. The SUV moved quickly but smoothly through the city streets, the agents inside silent and focused. David sat back in the seat, hands resting lightly on his lap, his mind replaying the events that had just unfolded. Even though the encounter had been terrifying in the moment, he felt calm now. He had handled the situation with composure, and the consequences of rash assumptions were already visible. The agents in the vehicle glanced at one another, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They had seen many high-pressure situations in their careers, but there was something different about David. He was not just another government official or military officer. He carried a presence that demanded respect without needing to assert it loudly. His calm confidence was magnetic, and it clearly unsettled anyone who had misjudged him. One agent finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Sir, the officer who stopped you, his actions were reckless. We'll make sure the appropriate internal investigation is carried out, but more importantly, your safety is the top priority." David nodded slowly, his eyes staring out of the window at the passing streetlights. "I appreciate that. But this isn't just about me. It's about the message it sends. If someone in my position can be pulled over at gunpoint simply because of their skin color, what message does that send to ordinary citizens? To their children? To people who will never hold my rank or my role, but still live under the same fear?" The agent's gaze hardened, recognizing the weight of his words. "You're right, sir. It's a serious issue. And the Pentagon will take notice. This will not be ignored." David leaned back, allowing himself a small exhale. It had been a long day, a day filled with tension, fear, and a public lesson that should not have been necessary. And yet, he knew there was still more work to do. This incident would make headlines, and it would spark conversations. But beyond the media attention, the real goal was to ensure people understood the importance of fairness, respect, and measured judgment. Meanwhile, back at the roadside, the officer who had pulled David over was being questioned by his superiors. His colleagues stood silently around him, some shaking their heads, others avoiding eye contact. The local police chief was on the phone, trying to coordinate with higher authorities, while also grappling with the humiliation of the situation. Officers who had arrived as backup were visibly uncomfortable, realizing they had arrived too late to control a situation that had already spiraled beyond their authority. The officer at the center of it all could barely meet anyone's eyes. He replayed the sequence of events in his mind: the pullover, the gun, the phone call, the arrival of the federal agents. Each moment now seemed like a misstep magnified by the presence of witnesses, both at the scene and through video recordings that were already circulating online. The embarrassment pressed down on him like a heavy weight. Back in the SUV, David's thoughts turned to the broader implications. This was more than just a personal encounter. It was a microcosm of larger issues, a clear example of what happens when fear and prejudice guide decisions. He knew that many people in similar situations, ordinary citizens, didn't have the same access to authority or protection that he did. Their voices often went unheard, their dignity too easily dismissed. He thought about the children in the crowd, wide-eyed and watching, phones raised as they recorded every detail. What would they learn from this moment? That the law protects everyone equally? Or that assumptions based on appearance could still put people in danger? David felt a responsibility to make sure the lesson was clear. Respect, fairness, and humanity could not be optional. The agents seemed to sense his thoughts, their silence respectful. One of them finally said, "Sir, once we secure the area, the media will likely reach out. Are you prepared to address the public?" David looked at him, expression calm but firm. I will speak. But my words must emphasize the broader truth, not just my personal experience. It is not about fear or anger. It is about accountability and fairness. The vehicle turned a corner, leaving behind the local chaos. The city streets seemed quieter now, almost surreal in contrast to the intensity of what had just happened. David's mind wandered briefly to the officer again, imagining the weight of regret pressing on him. He didn't feel anger toward the man, only a profound disappointment. Disappointment in the choices made, in the assumptions allowed to dictate behavior, in the opportunity for understanding that had been lost in a moment of fear. The SUV arrived at a secure location, a building that seemed ordinary from the outside but carried the weight of high-level security. Agents moved swiftly, opening doors and escorting David inside. The interior was quiet, efficient, and serious. Cameras and monitors lined the walls, and a sense of order and preparedness filled the space. David was led into a conference room, where other officials were waiting. Their faces were professional but attentive, clearly aware of the magnitude of the incident. One of them, a senior officer, stood as David entered. Colonel Carter, we have been briefed on the situation. You handled yourself admirably. The local officer has been detained for questioning, and the Pentagon will review the incident thoroughly. David nodded politely, acknowledging the words without allowing them to distract from the bigger picture. Thank you. But let us remember the most important point, that no one should have to experience what I did, regardless of rank or position. The system should protect everyone equally, and that includes addressing biases before they escalate into dangerous encounters. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his statement settling in. Each person present seemed to recognize the truth in his words, and the responsibility that came with ensuring fairness and accountability. Meanwhile, news of the incident had begun to spread. Videos captured on phones were now circulating online, showing the moment David had remained calm as the officer had pointed a gun at him. Viewers across the country were shocked, divided between anger at the officer's actions and admiration for David's composure. Social media erupted with commentary, debates, and support. The story became more than a single incident, it became a symbol of a larger struggle. Back at the roadside, the officer's internal review had begun. He sat in a small room, surrounded by paperwork, his hands shaking slightly as he filled out reports. Each line of text felt heavier than the last, a stark reminder that one moment of poor judgment could have life-changing consequences. He realized that the world was watching, not just the local community, but a nation ready to hold him accountable. David's phone buzzed quietly in his jacket pocket. He ignored it, knowing that whatever messages awaited could wait. For now, he needed to focus on the bigger picture, on the conversations that needed to happen, and on ensuring that this incident became a lesson rather than just a sensational story. The agents gave him a moment alone, allowing him to gather his thoughts. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes briefly, and let the tension of the past hours slowly ebb away. The fear he had felt when the gun had been pointed at him was still there, a faint echo in the back of his mind, but it was now accompanied by a sense of purpose. He knew that his calm response had made a difference, that his actions had not only protected himself but had set an example for the entire community watching. One agent returned, handing him a cup of water. "Sir, if you're ready, we can discuss the next steps. The media will likely request a statement, and the Pentagon will want a detailed report." David took a sip, considering the situation carefully. "Yes, we will address it. But let us focus on education and awareness first. Let people understand why assumptions can be dangerous, and why respect and fairness are essential in every encounter. That is the most important message to deliver." The agent nodded, understanding. "Agreed, sir. And we will ensure your safety while doing so." Outside the building, the world continued to react. People talked, shared videos, and debated. Some were angry, some inspired, but almost everyone was now aware of the incident. And through it all, David's calm presence had made it clear, courage and composure, combined with a commitment to justice, could transform even a terrifying encounter into a powerful lesson for all. The day had been long, exhausting, and intense. But as the evening sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, David felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had turned a moment of potential tragedy into an opportunity for awareness, education, and reflection. And while the story was far from over, he knew that the message would be heard. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. For the first time since the incident began, he felt a sense of control not over others, but over the way the situation was being turned into a force for good. And that, more than anything, gave him hope for the future. The next morning, David awoke early, still feeling the weight of the previous day. The events replayed in his mind like a vivid film: the pullover, the gun, the call to the Pentagon, and the tense moments that followed. Even now, the intensity of the experience lingered, but there was also a sense of calm purpose. He knew his role was far from over. The incident had not only affected him personally, it had become a symbol for so many others. He dressed carefully, choosing simple, professional attire that reflected authority without arrogance. As he walked to the secure conference room where officials awaited him, he reviewed what he would say to the public. It was essential that his words were clear, honest, and constructive. He didn't want anger or fear to dominate the conversation. He wanted respect, fairness, and accountability to be the message that resonated. Inside the conference room, several high-ranking officials, including representatives from the Pentagon, waited. Their expressions were serious, yet respectful. They had spent the night reviewing footage, gathering statements, and preparing for the inevitable media attention. Despite the chaos of the previous day, the atmosphere now was orderly and focused. David greeted each person calmly. "Thank you for taking the time to address this," he said, his voice steady. "The events yesterday were unnecessary and avoidable. We must ensure they are never repeated, for anyone, regardless of position or appearance." A senior officer nodded. "We've coordinated with local authorities and initiated an internal review. The officer who stopped you has been suspended pending investigation. We also plan to conduct additional training across the department to prevent similar incidents in the future." David listened carefully, appreciating the swift response but knowing that words alone were not enough. "Suspensions and investigations are important," he replied, "but long-term change requires education and awareness. Bias and assumptions do not vanish overnight. It is the responsibility of every officer to treat all citizens with fairness and respect, and that begins with understanding." Meanwhile, news outlets were already preparing their coverage. The video from the roadside, showing David's calm demeanor as the officer had pointed a gun, had gone viral. Social media platforms buzzed with reactions: shock, admiration, anger, and debate. Many people commented on the bravery and composure David displayed. Others questioned the judgment and actions of the officer. The story had become more than a personal encounter, it was now a conversation about society, safety, and accountability. David knew the attention could be overwhelming, but he welcomed the opportunity to speak. When he stepped in front of the cameras, he felt a sense of responsibility. Every word mattered. He looked into the lens and spoke clearly, with measured authority. "Yesterday, I experienced an encounter that should never have happened. I was pulled over at gunpoint, judged not for my actions, but for the color of my skin. This incident is not just about me. It is about the assumptions that too often guide decisions and the consequences they carry." He paused, letting the words sink in. The room, filled with journalists and camera crews, was silent. Every ear listened closely, every eye focused. "We must remember that fear should never guide actions, especially when those actions carry the potential to harm. We must hold ourselves accountable," educate ourselves, and treat every individual with dignity and fairness. Only then can we ensure the safety and trust of the public we serve. The statements sparked immediate discussion. Commentators praised his calm demeanor, the clarity of his message, and the call for systemic awareness. Social media amplified the words, and conversations spread beyond local communities to national discourse. People debated, shared, and reflected on the meaning of the incident. David's voice had become more than his own, it had become a symbol of courage, wisdom, and the importance of measured responses in moments of tension. Back at the local police station, the officer involved faced a thorough investigation. He sat in a small, stark room, confronted with the reality of his actions. Supervisors and investigators reviewed every detail, body cam footage, eyewitness statements, and the video that had gone viral. The weight of the incident pressed heavily on him. He had acted impulsively, and now the consequences were unavoidable. He realized that trust, once broken, could not easily be repaired. David, however, did not harbor resentment. He understood that anger often escalated situations, while calmness and reason could inspire change. He had chosen the latter path, not only for his safety but also for the opportunity to create a lesson. He wanted the public to see that dignity, respect, and courage could overcome fear and prejudice. In the days that followed, David met with local officials, community leaders, and youth groups. He shared his experience openly, emphasizing the importance of empathy, understanding, and fairness. He encouraged officers to attend training programs and workshops designed to help them recognize and address bias. He spoke to school groups, reminding young people that every individual deserves respect, and that courage often comes in the form of calm composure and wise decisions. The media continued to cover the story, but the focus gradually shifted from shock to education. Articles highlighted David's professionalism, the lessons learned, and the steps being taken to prevent future incidents. Interviews with experts reinforced the importance of fair treatment, and discussions about systemic bias became more thoughtful and constructive. The story had moved beyond sensational headlines to a meaningful conversation about society and responsibility. David's family watched closely, proud of his calm leadership and dedication to positive change. They had worried for his safety during the initial incident, but now they saw the impact he was making. His actions demonstrated that courage and wisdom could turn a dangerous encounter into an opportunity for learning and growth. Even the officer who had pulled David over experienced a transformation, though it was difficult and humbling. He participated in intensive training and counseling, learning to recognize how assumptions and fear had guided his actions. Over time, he developed a deeper understanding of the consequences of his choices and the importance of fairness in every encounter. While the incident would remain a part of his record, it also became a turning point for his personal growth and professional awareness. Weeks later, David received a formal acknowledgement from the Pentagon. The letter commended him for his calm and courageous handling of the situation and highlighted the lessons learned from the incident. It emphasized the importance of leadership, composure, and education in fostering a safer, more respectful environment for all citizens. David accepted the recognition quietly, knowing that the true reward was the positive change that had begun to take root. As life gradually returned to normal, David continued to use his platform to promote awareness and understanding. He spoke at conferences, engaged with community initiatives, and mentored young officers, sharing the lessons he had learned. His experience had been intense and frightening, but it had also become a catalyst for meaningful change. Reflecting on the entire episode, David understood the power of calm, rational action. The gun had been pointed, the assumptions had been made, but he had remained composed. He had turned fear into purpose, danger into opportunity, and a moment of injustice into a powerful lesson. His approach had not only protected him but had inspired others to reflect, learn, and grow. And in the end, that was the true victory. Not headlines, not recognition, but the knowledge that one moment, handled with dignity and wisdom, could spark understanding, change behavior, and create hope for a better, fairer society. David smiled quietly, a sense of fulfillment filling him. The city outside moved on, life continued, but the message of that day remained clear: fairness, respect, and courage could overcome fear, prejudice, and impulsive judgment. And through that, real change could begin one encounter at a time.